Welcome to Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. We are your messy, imperfect homeschool mom friends. I am your host, Megan, and my awesome co-host is...
Hi, I'm Amanda.
Hello. So the end of the year is always chaos in our homes, and there's just not enough time or motivation, if we're being honest. So for the remainder of this year, we've got some unfiltered bites coming your way. It's all still great content, but not nearly as long as our typical episodes. Hopefully you can fit everything in between all of your end of year holiday craziness. So in the new year, we'll dive back into full-length episodes and book clubs. That'll all start in January. As long as we're talking logistics of the podcast, we would love to invite you to like, follow, subscribe, whatever, right? Wherever you are, if you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, if you hang out on social media, on Instagram, TikTok, whatever, find us. Like us, please, share us, give us a review, whatever the functions are on that particular site that you're on. We would be eternally grateful. It helps us grow our audience a little bit. It helps us gain a little bit of visibility. Unfortunately, in life now, everything is run by an algorithm. And so if you can help us drive that algorithm and loop more secular, progressive homeschool parents into the mix, we would be so happy. So thank you in advance.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so today we are going to be talking about 3D printers. It's definitely worth checking out your local library or any maker spaces that you have nearby where you can go and actually try them out before buying and get a handle on it, see if it is for sure something that you want. That said, not all of us are lucky enough to have access to those sorts of free or super affordable resources. And also sometimes you're just ready to pull the trigger. So we're going to talk 3D printers in case that's something that you're thinking about buying either for the holidays this year or as a birthday present, or even just part of your homeschool curriculum. You're ready to take that step. Mm-hmm. So our guest today is Sasha, who happens to be Megan's husband. We've roped him into helping us out here. So when your boys became interested in 3D printers, I know Sasha kind of dived into learning everything there was to know about them. And so we're going to make you our kind of de facto expert on this. I have no idea. I know nothing about 3D printers. I'm not even entirely sure what they look like outside of the ones that show up in my Facebook feed from time to time. So can you give us just kind of a high level overview of what exactly is a 3D printer?
Okay, so a 3D printer, is a device, a machine that essentially takes plastic, melts it, and then basically squeezes it out of a nozzle, similar to if you were injecting goo or glue into a mold. And it basically creates a shape, an object out of melted plastic. And so you're taking plastic, it looks like a weed whacker string. It comes on rolls and you heat it up, and the machine has a computer in it that interprets commands, and there's software that takes an idea from a file, a 3D file, and then creates that object in plastic. In most cases, there are some other materials out there, but 99% of the time you're printing in plastic. So the hard part, I think, for most people is they think that it's just that simple, right? You find a file for your favorite object. I mean, the possibilities are endless. I've printed, for example, we had an Amazon Echo Dot and we needed somewhere to put it. And so I printed a bracket where it literally plugs into the wall and it mounts on the wall. Remote control holders. Megan had Aiden do some hooks for towels for the cargo van that we had. Things like that. I mean, the possibilities are literally endless. Nowadays, they're actually using a lot of that stuff for prototyping because it's much cheaper. If they need to test a part to see if it fits or if it works, it's much easier to design it, 3D print it in a couple of hours at home or on a more expensive printer. And then if it really works, then they can say, okay, we want to mass produce this thing and send it off to make, thousands of quantities in metal or whatever the higher end material is going to be. But the hardest thing for people to comprehend is that it's not quite as simple as your everyday printer where you just pick a file and say print, and then at the other end you get an object. Now, that has evolved. So it depends on the printer, but a 3D printer, basically, for those who are looking to get into it, what I would say is there is a level of trial and error, adjustment, calibration. It's not a set it and forget it, print it and go. There is an element of, more human interaction, let's say, in order to make sure that you're getting the object. Now, again, the technology keeps getting better daily, but if you want to get one of those printers that's more accurate and a little bit more user friendly, less setup, build it. The first one that I bought in 2017, it came in a box, probably about the size of a desktop computer. When it took me probably an hour or two to assemble it, but then once I assembled it, then I had to make sure that it was calibrated, that all the pieces were level, square, etc. And then I went through a whole setup and calibration process, right? Some of the newer printers now, they literally come built in the box. It's literally, take it out of the box, put a roll in, and you can probably be printing in 30 minutes. But the cost of that is significantly higher. I mean, when I bought my printer, I think I paid about $500 for it. The cost of entry, if you want to get into Ender, so Creality is the cheapest Chinese company. They really kind of revolutionized, I would say, the 3D print world back in 2016, 17 or so, because at the time they came out with a printer that I think was $299. And then you could buy them at like Micro Center. They do coupons, so you can buy them sometimes for like $99 now. And so it's really tempting for somebody to want to try it and get into it. But you'd be surprised how many I see where people just tried it and tried it and tried it and it just wasn't for them. And so they literally put them on Facebook Marketplace, Amazon, eBay, wherever, to try to get rid of them because it just didn't work out for them. I think Aiden brought one home from like I don't know, a swap meet or a flea market or something. I think they paid $25 for it, and it worked fine. I mean, it needed a little calibration, needed a little TLC, but, it didn't need anything that wasn't already there, just needed somebody that knew what to do and how to work it. And again, they've gotten more user friendly, let's call it. They've also gotten much faster at printing. What used to take, that's the other thing too, is like some people are like, oh my God, it's going to take how many hours and how many rolls of plastic to print that item? It's not something quick. There are two different types of 3D printers. The most common used, you're actually printing plastic. You're melting plastic and printing it. The other type, which is used more for if you need something with more detail but doesn't have to be as strong, is a resin printer. And that uses a chemical process to, basically, it's a liquid. So you put resin in and it basically charges the particles and stuff like that. And then you get they use them for like figurines and things like that, things that need more detail. But most people mess with FDM, which is more your everyday 3D printer.
All right. So before I ask my next question, I'm just going to put this out there for anyone who's listening and is like, I'm so lost. I have no idea how I'm going to make this work in my house. I'm there with you, right? My understanding of 3D printing is, one, in Big Bang Theory, they bought a 3D printer and it was many thousands of dollars. And then two, my favorite pair of compression leggings are 3D printed. I don't know how they do it. I don't really care, but I love them and I buy them and I wear them quite happily. Okay, so you talked about if you're going to get a 3D printer, you have to calibrate. Does it come with like an idiot's guide to calibrating your printer, or are you using YouTube to figure out how to do that? Like, how are we calibrating it once we buy it?
Yeah, so there are, for most 3D printers, because they've been out, unless you're buying something that's like brand new to the market, there's been plenty of people who have put together tutorials, YouTube videos, guides. So when I bought the Enders, there was a gentleman who had created the ultimate guide to the Ender series. And he wanted you to start from the very beginning. He wanted you to start like when you go to assemble your printer, follow these steps to make sure that your printer is completely square. Make sure you calibrate it, like you assemble it a certain way. And he basically gave you like a step-by-step guide to really maximize the calibration, the performance, and everything. And I mean, he was actually very active in a lot of the Facebook groups. And he actually, even at one point, so I wanted to use different firmware, and he jumped on a Facebook Messenger call with me and helped me go through setting up software or firmware the first time that I wanted to make some pretty radical changes that was not the norm. And he literally just jumped on a messenger call and was like, "Hey, I'll just walk you through it." And so I screen shared with him, and he helped me, and I picked it up from there. And from there on, I knew what I was doing and was able to do it myself. And part of the problem too with 3D printers nowadays is, people get into a vicious cycle with either wanting to replace parts because they think other parts are better or upgrade. And then they end up with, there's so many parts that are clones or knockoffs. And, so you buy parts and you expect them to be better, but they're really not. And so a lot of people go down that cycle. And so I see a lot of 3D printers for sale too, where again, people spent money to modify it and then went down a rabbit hole that they just couldn't crawl themselves back out of. And at that point, they just gave up because they just threw in the towel.
All right. I can totally see that. And it sounds like a pretty supportive community around this idea of 3D printing. So if you have like a middle schooler or a teenager who's wanting to get into it, it sounds like you might want to monitor their usage, but there's some online communities and things like that where they can get in there and get help or ideas and stuff like that. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, for sure. And then, when it comes to creating, one part is actually getting the printer working and then getting it printing nicely. But when it comes to creating, I mean, really the sky's the limit. So you can literally find pretty much a file for just about anything that you might be looking for. But the other side to that is opening up a world of CAD and actually designing your own stuff. And so everybody starts with, oh, like I found this really cool file. Like, again, it's just out of need, right? Or out of coolness. Like, I want to do this, echo mount for the wall, or I want to do a hook for a towel. And you start with that, and again, you go with, oh, that's pretty cool. I love RC cars, and so then I was like, oh, you know what? I could like design this for RC car. And then there was things that I actually took one step further then. So I designed something, I 3D printed it to make sure that it fit and worked. And then Aiden had a CNC machine. And so then I took my design and I ordered carbon fiber off of Amazon and then CNC'd the part out of actual carbon fiber. So I took it all the way from an idea, I created the part in CAD, then I 3D printed it to refine it and make sure it fit. And then I CNC'd it to a final part that I could actually sell and make a couple of bucks on.
Okay, so I have two quite specific questions. The first is, what brands do you recommend, or are there any that like you really like avoid this one? You're just going to have more headaches than it's worth. And then also, what should people expect to spend for an entry-level printer and then a mid-grade, like mid-level printer? We won't worry about the most high-end. They're not listening to this podcast if they're ready for like top of the line.
I think nowadays really there's really two paths that people take. Path A is the entry level, like I want to dabble in it. And the Creality series, Ender 3, I don't know what the latest version is on. They keep, every 6 or 8 months they come up with a new version. But basically the Ender 3 is the core of it. And they have, like an Ender 3, V2, V3, V3 Pro. I mean, they keep, like I said, they keep changing the model, but whatever the latest Ender 3 is, like I said, if you're looking to get into it, if you happen to have a micro center store in your town or nearby or within driving distance, Micro Center runs some pretty great deals on them all the time. And they'll do like $99 coupons and $199 coupons or whatever it is. Whatever printer you get, you're going to want to get at least some sort of starter supply of filament. PLA, lactic acid, I think is what PLA stands for, but that's the most common like everyday used filament. It's basically what everybody pretty much starts with, and then there's other filaments that you can get into with higher tensile strength, higher temperature ratings, things like that. But PLA is the most common. You can expect to pay probably about $20 on average for a roll on Amazon. Your Micro Center, if you're buying the printer there, will also have the filament in stock. It comes in 1,001 different colors. And then in the colors, you can get into metallic, silks, wood, sparkly, neon, glow in the dark. I mean, sometimes like they would come out with a cool filament. I would just buy it just to like, because it just looked cool and sounded cool. The wood filaments were really cool. So it literally prints to look like a piece of wood. And now, they're getting into metal filaments and all kinds of carbon fiber filled filaments, things like that. But most standard firm. If you want to get into, I would honestly say, while it's significantly more expensive, and it's still not, I would say it's top of the line for your everyday user, but there's still steps above it. But the Bamboo Labs printers are probably the next level. Now they do have 3 or 4 different levels. So I think the smallest one starts at around, I want to say in the 300s. I think it's called the A1. So that's a smaller one. It looks more like an Ender 3. It's not enclosed. And then they go into they have a P1 and an X1, and those are enclosed now. And having an enclosed printer at the beginning probably doesn't mean anything. But when you want to start to print more exotic materials that have to have heat control, that you can't have ambient air hitting them because the plastic will get distorted and things like that, the enclosed printers are definitely where it's at. And then those Bamboo Labs, the higher end ones, are also available with what they call an AMS. And the AMS is a add-on device that sits on top of the printer. And so in most basic printers, you're able to print one color, one filament at a time. With the addition of these AMSs that came onto the scene probably about 3 years ago, you can now print up to 4 colors at once. The cool thing is it'll literally change colors automatically. So you can set up your file. So if, let's say, you have a logo, you can say, okay, I want this part of the logo to be printed in color 1, this part of the logo printed in color 2, this part of the logo printed in color 3, and this part of the logo printed in color 4. And it will literally switch between the 4 colors automatically. And at the end, you get a very nicely printed multicolor print that you didn't have to sit there and switch colors for. You could do technically multicolor prints to a certain degree with a single color printer. You are limited to how complex it can be, but you're literally sitting there and saying, okay, print this one. It'll print it for 30 minutes, and then you have to pause the print, pull the roll out, put a different roll in, load it up again, and the chances for failure are higher. So if you want to do multicolor printing and stuff like that, the Bamboo Labs S, I think it is, and X1 are definitely the printers that you want to go with. Those will run you around $900 to $1,200. So they're still not too crazy expensive.
So this is my last question, and then I'll stop dominating the conversation and let Megan have a word or two. So if someone was wanting to buy a 3D printer for Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or whatever they're wanting to pick one up for, and they want to add some accessories to make it more fun and something the kid can start playing with right away, they're going to need some filament. You were talking about that. Are there any other accessories that they're going to want to pick up?
There's some tools. There's some small, you can get on Amazon, you can get a nice 3D printing toolkit. It comes with cutters to be able to cut the filament. It comes with scrapers to be able to remove the print from the plate. There are some different build plates, so that the actual metal plate that you're printing on can be glass or metal. There are some innovations in that. That's pretty cool. So for example, I started playing with, there was a plate that you could get that had a carbon fiber texture to it. And so when you printed, it actually transferred the visual of the carbon fiber look to the surface of what you were printing on. And so you could just swap out, they're usually magnetic. And so you could just swap out the magnetic plate that you were printing on and put one that had a texture on it. And they had holographic, carbon fiber, things like that. And so those were kind of cool. So the Bamboo Labs, I just happened to look them up. So they're actually on sale right now for Black Friday, but the A1 Mini starts at $199 on sale right now. The regular A1 is $299. The P1S starts at $549 right now, and then the top of the line one starts at $999 right now. It's always good to have some extra nozzles on hand. People tend to clog them or ruin them or wear them out.
Well, thank you for answering all of my questions. And I might get a chance to tell you later on in the episode before we wrap up, but thank you also for coming on and sharing all of that. Like I said, truly,
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to be wearing my 3D printed leggings and calling it good, but I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who want to be able to actually print something themselves.
There you go.
It can definitely take over a space. I mean, we started with one printer became 2 printers, 3 printers, 4 printers, a resin printer, right? I mean, because that's that thing, right? If you're the person who likes to tinker and who likes to experiment and try new things and innovate and push the limits of what things can do, that's how it ends up being, right? So in a small space, I'm not saying it's not possible, but it can become a lot. But I wanted to just kind of also bring up, based upon what Sasha was saying, like he brought up CAD just a little bit. The math component of 3D printing is tremendous. I mean, the arguing over who took my calipers between Sasha and my oldest kid is like, you know, where are my calipers? Where are my calipers? Right? Because they're measuring things down to these fine little details in order to recreate and to do these things. So there's so much math and engineering and science and all of that kind of stuff in 3D printing. It's amazing. If you are looking for ways to get extra math in there or to apply math, have hands-on math, it's all there, which is pretty awesome. And then I will say, like Sasha was talking about, people who have modified a printer to the point of no return. And I think he might have subtly been referring to one of our kids in part of that. So we had my oldest kiddo, Aiden, he had an Ender 3 or an Ender 5. I forget which one it is because we've had quite a few of them. And
I think he started with a 10. Then so he went from an Ender CR10. Then he bought forget what it's called, Prusa MK3. Then he bought an Ender 3 that he found at a flea market or at a garage sale. And then I think and he actually 3D printed his own from scratch 3D printer. So he 3D printed a 3D printer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then he bought a Polaroid 3D printer just because it was on sale and it seemed like something fun to do. And which I don't think they make that one anymore. I'm pretty sure it was discontinued. And then he had a resin printer. But one of his Enders, he just beat to death. I mean, any wacky thing you could try to do to this thing. And in the beginning, I started getting a little frustrated and I was like, dude, can't you just use the printer the way it was meant to be used? Like every time it's broken and there's frustration, and then he needed help and all this kind of stuff. And then I was like, well, hold on a second, actually, like part of innovation is pushing things to their limits and trying new things. And so some of them are going to work and some of them aren't going to work. And so I had to really reframe my thinking around that and be like, at the end of the day, it was one that he didn't spend a lot of money on, or we didn't spend a lot of money on, whichever. And I'm like, that's how things are innovated, right? Is when people try new things and push stuff to their limits. So I kind of got over that. The other thing I'll add is that resin printing that Sasha brought up is the chemicals require safety gear. So Aiden's resin printer lived in the garage. It was super cool, but he had like one of those painter's masks on with like the big ventilation thing and goggles and gloves and like a whole setup for when he would use resin. So Amanda, do not put a resin printer in your 2-bedroom condo. It would not go very well, right? It needs a little bit more of a setup. So just do a little research before you bring a resin printer in, or send us a message, and between Sasha and Aiden, they'll be happy to help and kind of answer some questions there. And then the last thing was, Sasha mentioned files. You can get free files galore on a website called Thingiverse, which we'll link in the show notes here. And then you can also purchase some files on Etsy. And I'm sure there's some other websites as well, but Thingiverse is kind of like the land of 3D printing free files. So it's a great place to go when you're starting and you're just looking to kind of experiment and try things that are tested and proven before you start designing your own stuff. So we'll link that down there as well for you. But so in case you can't tell, I'm married to MacGyver, and like literally one time he like resoldered a circuit board in a fryer while I was cooking dinner and the fryer died. So Sasha teaches STEM and automotive classes on OutSchool. He does this ridiculous 12-week automotive class that's so in-depth and so ridiculous. That's Sasha's background is car manufacturing, working for a a global giant in car manufacturing. So yeah, so he goes through everything, like what are all those numbers on tires mean, and what is everything that's attached to the serpentine belt, and how do they work together, and all that kind of stuff. So if you have a kiddo who's interested in how things work truly deeply, like all the way down to the how it works, we will link that class and put a $10 coupon in the description as well. So we did not come up with this, so I'm going to read it out, but just go grab it from the description and copy and paste it over on OutSchool. It is of Cure Auto 10. So OFCURAUTO 10. It's a mouthful, but it'll work. So you can jump into that automotive class anytime. If they're on week 7 and they're talking about, I don't know, tires, it's fine. You just loop back around at the end until you get the full 12 weeks and it's all good. It's a really fun class. So as long as we're on the topic of coupons, our Patreon memberships are on sale, which is super exciting. They're on sale through January 4th, and we've got a coupon code for 50% off your first month. Patreon members get unit study. There's live meetings where you can come ask questions about homeschooling. You can come make friends. So there's tons of options over on Patreon. You can use the code BITE50. BITE50 at checkout. Again, there's a link in the description for how to find our Patreon, and we'll also talk about some of the benefits of joining in more detail there and list the coupon code for you. So you'll be all set.
Yeah. I just want to also point out, we say there are live meetings, and some other people will say that too. And then once you actually go join the Patreon, you find out it's like twice a year or maybe quarterly, but we do 2 live meetings every month. So you're definitely, if you join at that VIP level, you're going to have lots of opportunities to talk with us, which, I mean, come on, we're awesome, but to also talk with other homeschooling parents. So there's definitely a lot of time for connecting and community building there.
We do love that, right? I love it. But yeah, that's all for us for today. So drop your questions about 3D printers in the comments below. I will gladly hunt my husband down and get him to answer all of your questions. There's nothing he would love more, because me calling him and going, this thing doesn't work, is not enough. So let's add more of that to his life. So feel free to drop your questions in the comments. We'll get you answers to those questions. And in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah, have a great one.
Thank you.